Today I'm going to be going over a journal that I stumbled across over the internet, and it's regarding glyphosate. I've been following up with several different studies on glyphosate and its link and connection to various chronic diseases. Specifically, now the EU and several countries are looking into banning glyphosate and the use of it. It's widespread use worldwide of this herbicide. Supposedly glyphosate, from my readings through Monsanto and through their companies that sort of or sites that promote that glyphosate is not toxic or does not have a significant effect on human health or any sort of health related issues with glyphosate. They mention that glyphosate readily degrades into the environment. Within a few days it is degraded and does not persist in the environment, and therefore when we consume it, or when it comes to the processing stages and eventually into like the food that we purchase from a supermarket, this glyphosate will be sort of degraded or not be there anymore. It is from their studies, it is harmless. It is less harmful than even table salt. So that's the whole notion you'd hear from many farmers or companies that support the use of glyphosate. But let's go further into the studies now. There are many studies that glyphosate is harmless, but let's take a look here. This Journal of Organic Systems in 2014, and the title is Genetically Engineered Crops, Glyphosate and the Deterioration of Health in the United States of America, by Nancy L. Swanson, Andrew Liu, John Abrahamson, and Bradley Wallet. They are from the International Federation of Organic Agricultural Movements, Abacus Enterprises. So it seems like it is a private industry sort of funded research. And let's take a look. And I was reading this journal, and it sort of struck me because it looks like the correlation coefficients are really high for most of the sort of correlations between the glyphosate application and this chronic disease. So in the abstract, they're mentioning that evidence is mounting that glyphosate interferes with many metabolic processes in plants and animals, and glyphosate residues have been detected in both. Glyphosate disrupts the endocrine system and the balance of gut bacteria. It damages DNA and is the driver of mutations that lead to cancer. Now, I've been doing some research as well, and yes, glyphosate does interfere with something called the schimate pathway in plants and in bacteria. What is the schimate pathway? So if we look here, the schimate pathway is a 7-step metabolic route used by bacteria, fungi, algae, some protozoan parasites, and plants for the biosynthesis of folates and aromatic amino acids, specifically phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. So we don't have this as humans, or in animals we don't have this pathway. So therefore phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan are essential amino acids. So if we look at that statement, and okay, yes, it is interfering with the metabolism of bacteria. Is it causing bacterial death? Is it causing bacteria not to function properly? Is it affecting our gut flora? Most likely. It seems like it does affect the schimate pathway. And so 5-enol pyruvyl schimate 3-phosphate transferred into charismate. This pathway is what is sort of obstructed or not allowed to continue, whether in the plant or in the bacteria. So we are going to look further into this study, and let's take a look. The Pearson correlation coefficients are highly significant. The p-value of less than 10 to the power of -5. between glyphosate applications and hypertension. So for those of you that didn't do so well maybe in stats, the Pearson correlation coefficient is sort of like a number that we can use to determine the linear relationship between two variables. So if we're talking in this case, one variable being the glyphosate application, or the amount of glyphosate being applied over a period of years, and this chronic disease prevalence amongst a population, if one of them is changing and the other one is also changing, then this correlation or linear correlation number represents like how much of these variables agree sort of linearly together. It doesn't really represent sort of causation. It just determines correlation, that yes, they do sort of work together or run together as time passes. The example, for example, here we have glyphosate and hypertension. So as glyphosate is being applied, hypertension sort of is following as well in terms of the time being added and sort of the changes that are happening. So there is a high linear correlation, but we cannot be conclusive and say yes because of glyphosate, and this would also be sort of not really scientific to come to that conclusion off the bat, because there is many toxins or toxic pollutants that are in the environment, such as heavy metals, VOCs, different gases, stressors, financial stresses, physiological stresses. So we can't be sort of conclusive, but we have to sort of take this into account and do further studies. And when we say further studies, we need to really do concrete physiological studies and determine, does glyphosate cause harm? Does glyphosate cause damage to the human body or to animals that are grazing on like grass or wheat or hay that are sort of contaminated with glyphosate? So let's take a look. We say the correlation glyphosate application and a stroke, that's 0.925. Diabetes prevalence 0.971, diabetes incidence 0.935, obesity 0.962. All of these major chronic disease, Alzheimer's 0.917. I think autism is there at 0.989. Inflammatory bowel disease 0.938. Cancers of the thyroid 0.988. Liver, cancers of the liver 0.960. Cancers of the bladder 0.981. Cancers of the pancreas 0.918, and kidney and myeloid leukemia 0.878. So the Pearson correlation coefficients are highly significant between the percentage of GE corn, or genetically engineered corn, and soy planted in the US, and hypertension. So this is relating genetically engineered corn and soy in the US. So the quantities, or as years pass, how much corn and GE corn and soy has been planted, and they related this or correlated this with the also incidence of these chronic diseases separate from glyphosate being added. So this is sort of as a sort of a comparison model to see is there any comparison between glyphosate being added and this sort of notion of genetically engineered corn and soy planted, because we know that genetically engineered products are heavily sprayed with glyphosate. They are engineered in a way to be resistant to this Roundup or herbicide. So they go into some introduction. Within the last 20 years, there has been an alarming increase in serious illness in the US, along with a marked decrease in life expectancy. Centers of Disease Control and Prevention estimates that the cost of diabetes and diabetes-related treatment was approximately $116 billion in 2007. During the same time period, there has been an exponential increase in the amount of glyphosate applied to food crops and in the percentage of genetically engineered food crops planted. We undertook a study to see if correlations existed between the rise of GE crops, the associated glyphosate use, and the rise in chronic disease in the US. So they talk about genetic engineering and how it occurs. They mentioned a cauliflower mosaic. So they mention about how plants, animals, fungi, viruses, bacteria belong to separate kingdoms. So natural hybridization, although being claimed by genetically modified, genetically engineered companies, that this is sort of like a natural process very similar to hybridization. But in hybridization, we're not dealing with out of domain or out of kingdoms coming together and forming sort of a hybrid species. This is not what is the case with hybridization. With genetically engineering, you're actually taking, say, from a bacterial or from a fungi, from a totally different species, totally different kingdom, a portion of its DNA, not necessarily just a gene, but a whole, possibly partial genome, or multiple genomes or multiple genes, and inserting them into another species without considering the possible consequences or studies as this organism grows and develops, and then eventually we are ingesting these products. So let's take a look. Exponentially increasing use of glyphosate worldwide. Since glyphosate was introduced in 1975 as the active ingredient of Roundup, it has become the most widely used herbicide for urban, industrial, forest, and farm use. Monsanto is the manufacturer of Roundup. Okay, so again, they just are going into more detail of the allowed residues in this case in all of these crops. So there is limits, especially in drinking water. You can look up your local municipal sort of guidelines, and you can look at the allowable limits of over 200 different chemicals in our drinking water, and glyphosate is one of them. And it's glyphosate now causes DNA damage in human cells. They said in 2012, Antonio et al. Published a review of the evidence on the teratogenicity and reproductive toxicity of glyphosate on vertebrates. So in 2009, Gazner et al. Published evidence that glyphosate-based herbicides are endocrine disruptors in human cells. So basically, they're causing hormonal imbalances. For example, you could have thyroid issues, or anterior or posterior pituitary gland issues, adrenal gland issues, and they're saying that glyphosate is causing or is acting as an endocrine disruptor. They report toxic effects to liver cells at 5 ppm and endocrine disrupting action starting at 0.5 ppm. Look at those low levels as opposed to the government guidelines here. Peppermint, quinoa 5, shellfish, soybean 20. So we're looking at grains, for example, cereal, up to 100 ppm. We're looking at issues here that these scientists or these studies are publishing, that glyphosate's causing DNA damage, is causing endocrine damage, disruption at levels of 0.5 ppm. So we can go further down, take this data, or I don't see that they've done any tests, but they just compiled data mainly from the CDC website and from other various sources. So we can see here the adoption of GE crops in the U.S. Adoption of GE crops in the U.S. From 1996, 1999, and then again exponential growth. And as you can see, the incidence per 100,000 also grew. From 1999, we had about 7 people per 100,000 being diagnosed with thyroid cancer, now to about 14 people. So that's like double the amount of people being diagnosed per 100,000 with thyroid cancer. Let's take a look here. Same idea. On the green we have pre-1993 trend. If there was no change in glyphosate application, you would probably have, like, from the study, from this data, you would see that this trend would have been following up through with, in terms of the incidence of, or as we see here, age-adjusted deaths due to hypertension. Hypertension could be also like stroke or heart attack. Okay, so going down further. Okay, so they go focus on sort of pathways or effects of glyphosate. According to CDC, approximately 1/3 of people with diabetes have not been diagnosed. They say, furthermore, lipoprotein metabolism disorder has been associated with Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's diseases. According to Merlot, recent evidence suggests a strict link between metabolic disorders and Alzheimer's disease. The last decade, much attention has focused specifically on the connection between dysfunctional lipid metabolism and Alzheimer's disease. Here we discuss aspects of lipid regulation, including changes in cholesterol levels, function of apolipoproteins and leptin, and how these relate to Alzheimer's disease pathogenesis. Okay, age-adjusted deaths due to obesity. Okay, so again, they took a correlation between obesity and glyphosate application. So as you see, glyphosate again is being applied in an exponential rate, and with it, so does the rate of obesity, or deaths due to obesity. Deaths per 100,000 went up. In this case, it's a small number, like it's a fraction. We'll say here in 1999, it's about one person, approximately one person. And rows is still not very significant, but when we punch in the numbers to, like, say, assuming that the population is 300 million in the US, divided by 100,000, so you got 3,000 times 1 point, right now at 2012 is 1.65. You're talking about 4,950 deaths due to obesity in 2012. Let's take a look in 1997. 1997, the deaths due to obesity were approximately, in this case, 0.65 to 0.75, so 3,000 times 0.75, so 2,250. So you're looking about an increase about 2,500 or 2,500 deaths per population in general due to obesity. Again, all of these studies show clear correlation between glyphosate application and the incidence of chronic disease occurring again in an exponential fashion. What is going on? Again, lipoprotein metabolism. Okay. End-stage renal disease deaths, again, same concept. Glyphosate being applied in an exponential rate, so does the chronic disease or deaths per 100,000 goes up at an exponential rate at the same sort of time period. These are not like, these are all happening within the same time period together. Renal failure death, so this is death due to renal failure. Again, all of these indicate that there is a strong correlation between glyphosate being applied at an exponential rate or exponential quantity and rate to crops, and not just the glyphosate being applied to corn and soy, but glyphosate being applied or genetically engineered products such as corn, such as soy, being grown at a much higher rate. Okay, so all of these tables, charts are again showing, this is a comparison here the correlation coefficient with respect to glyphosate application, and the chronic diseases listed here. So top of the list, thyroid cancer, going to pancreatic cancer, myeloid leukemia, lipoprotein metabolism, intestinal infection, deaths, multiple sclerosis deaths, dementia deaths, Parkinson's disease deaths, and then inflammatory bowel disease. Okay. Interpretation of results. The population of the U.S. is bombarded with a variable cocktail of chemicals daily, in addition to genetically engineered food and glyphosate. Water contaminants, chlorine and fluoride, heavy metals, food additives, aspartame, monosodium glutamate, carrageenan, and food coloring, to name a few. The U.S. President's Cancer Panel reported that a study by the CDC found many toxic chemicals in the blood and urine of most Americans that they tested, and the Environmental Working Group found up to 232 xenobiotic chemicals in the placental cord blood of newborns in the U.S. The people have been exposed to an increasing background level of chemicals and other toxins for over 70 years. Yet few, if any, have increased at the rate of glyphosate and genetically engineered crops. Glyphosate disrupts the ability of animals, including humans, to detoxify xenobiotics. This means that exposures to the numerous chemicals in food and the environment, such as endocrine disrupting chemicals and carcinogens, could be causing levels of damage that would not occur if the body were able to detoxify them. The accumulation of toxins as the result of low levels of poisoning over a long period of time leads to a high body burden of toxic load. Every person is unique, and the ability of the body or the path it takes to detoxify is both genetic and acquired. Okay. Conclusions. So basically they come and they conclude this study. The data is very strong and has significant correlations between increasing the use of glyphosate, GE crop growth, and the increase in multitude of diseases. Many of the graphs show sudden increases in the rates of diseases in the mid-1990s that coincide with the commercial production of GE crops. Of hundreds and even thousands of people, thousands of activists, food activists, thousands of people in the industry. There has to be a stop of glyphosate completely. There has to be a stop. We need to eat natural, organic, wholesome food. Food free of any preservatives or chemicals. Food that people can nourish on and get nutrition, the proper nutrition needed, so that we can have better health, so that our kids and our grandkids and our elderly can live a life of less suffering through proper nutrition.